My father handed my brother the company I built with my own two hands in front of 40 guests and said, "You're the face, he's the boss now." I didn't argue. I raised my glass and said congratulations. What nobody in that room knew was that 3 years earlier, I had already moved every patent and every contract into a name of my own choosing, so the company my brother inherited that night owned nothing but the building and the machines. His first board meeting would end with a lawyer reading one line out loud and my father's face going the color of old invoice paper. My name is Danielle Colson, and I was 34. I did not scream. I did not beg. That morning, before any of it, I was on the plant floor at 6:45 with grease on my sleeve and a cure rate printout in my hand. Briggs Automotive had a $2.1 million order riding on a batch of nitrile gaskets, and the resin was curing wrong. Too fast on the outer ring, too slow at the core. Sales had already told Briggs the shipment would be late. I hadn't told sales anything yet. I pulled the batch sheet and dropped the cure ratio by 4%, added 90 seconds to the press cycle, and told Hal Dunmore to run one test piece before he touched the rest of the line. Hal's run that floor for 19 years. He didn't ask me why. He just wrote the new numbers on the whiteboard in grease pencil and said, "You want me to call it in to Trevor, or you want to?" "Don't call anyone yet," I said. "Just run the piece." The test piece came out clean, even seal, even color, no soft spots. Hal held it up to the light like a man checking a coin for a mint mark, and then he set it down and went back to work without another word. That's the only compliment I've ever needed from anyone on that floor. I don't perform. I build the thing that works. Somebody else can stand up and take the bow. Sherry Voss caught me by the time clock on my way to wash the grease off. Sherry's kept our books since before I could reach the top shelf in the parts room, and she had an invoice in her hand she didn't quite know what to do with. "There's a payment come in," she said. "Wire transfer, licensing fee, made out through something called Meridian Seal Works. I don't have a vendor code for it. You want me to file it under R&D, or you want to tell me what it actually is?" "File it under R&D, I said. "I'll explain it when there's something to explain." She looked at me a second too long, the way she does when she knows I'm not lying, exactly, just not finished talking yet. Then she filed it. "That's Sherry. She keeps the books, and she keeps her questions to herself until you're ready." I went home, showered off the shop smell, and put on the blue dress my mother would have hated because she always said blue washed me out, and I wore it anyway because it was the only dress I owned that didn't have a chemical stain on the hem. The party was at the old rubber mill on Merriman Road, the one they'd converted into an event space with exposed brick and hanging bulbs, 2 miles from our plant on the towpath corridor. 40 guests, round tables. A banner that said 40 years, which was generous, since my father had only run Colson Seal and Gasket for 31 of them before I started actually running it myself. Colson Seal and Gasket has been an Akron company since 1974. My father likes to say that line into a microphone at least once a year. He said it that night too, right before he said the other thing. He had his scotch in one hand and the microphone in the other, and he thanked the towpath crowd, the old suppliers, the men he used to golf with at Firestone. Then he turned toward our table. "Danielle built this floor with her own hands," he said. 6 patents. Best engineer I ever hired, and I didn't even have to pay her market rate to keep her." A few people laughed. I didn't. But every company needs a face people trust in a room, and a boss who can make the hard calls. Trevor's that boss now. He raised his glass toward my brother. "You're the face. He's the boss now," he said, and 40 people raised their glasses with him. I want to tell you my hands shook. They didn't. I've spent 9 years signing off on tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. My hands don't shake for anything anymore. I raised my glass too. "Congratulations, Trevor," I said, and I meant the tone of it, if not the sentiment. He smiled at me across the table like a man who'd just been handed a set of keys to a car he'd never once changed the oil on. Trevor is 37. He's my brother, and I have loved him the way you love someone you grew up sharing a bathroom with, which is to say completely and with no illusions. He's never once asked what a cure ratio is. He can tell you exactly what an accountant means when he lowers his voice, though. He'd been doing a lot of quiet phone standing that whole month, out by the loading dock, phone against his ear, voice pitched low. I walked past him once, out near the dumpsters, and caught the tail end of one. "I told you, the dealership loan isn't my problem to fix tonight," he was saying. "I need 30 more days, that's all I'm asking." He saw me and hung up fast, the way you slam a drawer shut before someone sees what's inside it. "Sales numbers," he said. "Nothing exciting." "Sure," I said, and kept walking, because I already had a folder with his name on it, and I wasn't going to open it in a parking lot. I went home from the party a little after 11, hung the blue dress back in the closet, and sat at my kitchen table with my phone in both hands for exactly 4 minutes before I typed anything. Then I texted Warren Tate. Warren's been our outside patent attorney since before I was old enough to understand what a patent was, back when my mother used to bring him coffee in the same mug every Tuesday. I keep my mother's old credit union lockbox key on my keyring, the little brass one, worn smooth on one edge. Nobody's ever asked me what it opens. I've never explained it to anyone, not even Warren. My text to him was 5 words. "Send the transition letter Monday." He wrote back almost right away. "You sure? Once this starts, it doesn't reverse." I was sure. I'd been sure for 3 years, since the week after my mother's funeral, when I sat in Warren's office with a folder of assignment paperwork and my mother's handwriting still fresh in my memory, telling me to put my name on what my hands actually built. I slept fine that night, better than I had in months, honestly, which tells you something about what carrying a secret does to a person versus what it costs to keep pretending you don't have one. Trevor showed up at the plant at 7 the next morning in a gray suit that still had the fold lines from the store bag, calling himself the new CEO to anyone who'd listen. He was on the phone with Briggs Automotive by 7:15, telling them their new point of contact was him now, personally, and that Coulson Seal and Gasket was entering an exciting new chapter. He had no idea the chapter he was reading from wasn't the one he thought it was. He'd find out soon enough, and not from me. Trevor's new gray suit still smelled like the dry cleaner's plastic when he leaned into the break room that morning and told Hal Dunmore to call him Chief from now on. Hal didn't laugh. He just said, "Sure thing," and went back to his coffee, the way you'd humor a kid who'd just found his father's hat. I stayed on the floor most of that morning, running a second pass on the Briggs batch to make sure the fix held under full production speed, not just on one test piece. It held. 98% yield, well inside spec. Sherry caught me by the press line around 10 and said the Briggs plant manager had called twice already, first to thank whoever fixed the cure problem, second to ask why Trevor had called him personally to say Coulson Seal was restructuring for growth. "He told Briggs we're restructuring," Sherry said. "Is that a thing that's happening?" "Not the way he means it," I said. She didn't push. She just wrote something down on her pad and went back to her office, and I went back to the press line, because that's where the actual company was, whatever Trevor wanted to call himself in a phone conversation with our biggest client. By Wednesday, he had a business card printed. Trevor Coulson, Chief Executive Officer, with the old Towpath-era logo my mother had picked out in 1988. The one with the gear and the water droplet. He showed it to me in the hallway outside my office like it was something I'd want to hold. "Dad had these rushed," he said. "Nice, right?" "Nice," I said. "I want you to keep doing exactly what you're doing," he added, like that was a gift he was handing me. "Engineering, floor stuff, all of it. I'll handle the bank, the board, the big picture stuff." "The big picture stuff," I repeated. "Somebody's got to," he said, and smiled the smile he's had since he was 9 years old and told our mother he'd cleaned his room when he'd only shoved everything under the bed. I let him have the hallway and the business card. I had a call scheduled with Warren Tate that afternoon, and it wasn't about the big picture stuff. It was about the actual company. Warren's office sits above a bagel shop on West Market, 3 flights up, no elevator, because he says the stairs keep his knees from getting comfortable. I climbed them at 2 o'clock with a coffee I never got to drink. "You said Monday," he told me, before I'd even sat down. "It's already moving." The transition letter went out this morning to Meridian's registered agent, confirming the assignments fully executed and on file. That part was never in question, Danielle. It's been in question for 3 years now. It's real. "I know it's real," I said. "I need something else from you." He leaned back in his chair, the one with the cracked leather arm he's had since before I was born, and waited. "I want you to move up the annual IP audit," I said, "not wait for renewal season. Now." "Routine audit," he said slowly, watching my face the way he does when he's already 3 steps ahead of what I'm saying out loud. "On Meridian's assets or on the company's?" "Both," I said. "I want a clean paper trail showing exactly what's titled where, dated this month, before the board meeting." Warren doesn't ask why more than once. He asked it that once. "Is there a reason you think the paper trail isn't clean?" I thought about the loading dock, and Trevor's voice pitched low. 30 more days, that's all I'm asking. I thought about how a man who's never once asked what a cure ratio is had started talking to a bank instead of an accountant. "I don't know yet," I said. "I want to know before Trevor does." Warren nodded and picked up his phone. The audit request went out that afternoon, filed as routine annual maintenance, the kind of thing that generates no headlines and no phone calls, just a stack of paperwork moving quietly between his office, the county recorder, and the patent office in Washington. Nobody at Colson Seal and Gasket would have thought twice about it if they'd seen the request. That was the point. I drove back to the plant a little after 4 and found Trevor in what used to be my father's office, on the phone, feet up on the corner of the desk in a way my father never once allowed himself, even after 31 years of owning the place. I only caught the end of it because I was in the doorway before I meant to be. "No, I understand it's a standard request," Trevor was saying. "I just need a little time to get you the schedule. Can we say 2 weeks?" He hung up and saw me standing there. "Bank stuff," he said. "First National wants an updated asset schedule before they'll finalize the new credit line. Routine stuff, growth capital, nothing you need to worry about." "What credit line?" I said. "Working capital," he said, too fast, the way he used to answer our mother when she asked if he'd been the one to dent the truck. "For inventory, payroll smoothing, that kind of thing. Every company our size carries a line like this. What did you put up for it?" He looked at me for a second like he was deciding how much rope to hand me. "The building mostly," he said. "Equipment. Standard collateral package. Dad signed off on it before he left for Florida." I didn't ask about the patents. Not yet. I already knew, sitting 3 years back in a filing cabinet in Warren's office, exactly what Colson Seal and Gasket didn't have to offer any bank as collateral, because it wasn't the company's to offer. If Trevor had told First National otherwise, that was a problem he'd built for himself, one signature at a time, and I wasn't going to be the one to hand him the shovel to dig himself out. "Good luck with the schedule," I said, and went back to my own office, where the actual problems lived, the ones measured in thousandths of an inch. That Friday, my father called me from a fishing dock in Sarasota, the ocean loud enough behind him that I had to ask him to repeat himself twice. "Just checking in," he said. "How's Trevor settling into the chair?" "He's settling," I said. "He's got good instincts," my father said. "Different than yours. You build things, he sells things. Company needs both." "It does," I agreed. because it wasn't worth arguing with a man 40 years my senior about the difference between selling a thing and understanding how it's made. "You doing okay with all this?" he asked, and there was something almost careful in his voice, the closest my father gets to checking whether he'd hurt somebody. "I'm fine, Dad," I said. "I've got a floor to run." "That's my girl," he said, and I let that sit in my chest for a second the way I always do, half warm and half hollow, because being somebody's girl and being somebody's boss are two different inheritances, and I'd only ever been handed one of them out loud. I hung up and sat at my kitchen table that night with the little brass key on my ring, turning it over between my fingers the way I do when I'm thinking. I hadn't opened that lockbox since the week after the funeral. I'd read the letter inside it exactly once, memorized enough of it to carry the weight, and closed the box back up because some things you don't need in front of you every day to still be true. I thought about opening it again. Not yet, I told myself. Not until there's a reason. The reason came 9 days later, on a Tuesday, when Sherry knocked on my office door holding a printout with a First National letterhead on it, forwarded to her by mistake from Trevor's assistant, who hadn't realized accounting wasn't supposed to see it yet. "You're going to want to sit down for this one," Sherry said, and closed the door behind her before she handed it over. It was a compliance notice. First National's internal audit team had flagged an inconsistency in the collateral file for the Colson Seal and Gasket credit line, specifically regarding a patent listed as company-held security. They were requesting a certified ownership schedule within 15 business days, or the credit line would be suspended pending review. 15 business days. I did the math without meaning to. That put the deadline 3 days after Trevor's first scheduled board meeting as CEO, the one my father had already put on the calendar before he left for Florida, the one where Trevor was supposed to stand in front of the full board and present his growth plan like a man who actually owned what he was standing on. I read the notice twice, then folded it and set it on my desk, flat, careful, the way you set down something you don't want to shake. "Does Trevor know this went to accounting?" I asked. "Not yet," Sherry said. "You want me to tell him?" "No," I said. "File it under R&D. Sherry looked at me the way she had the night of the party invoice, like she knew exactly what box she was really filing, and it wasn't research and development. "Danielle," she said quietly, "whatever's coming. I've kept these books 30 years. I'd like some warning before it lands on my desk." "You'll have warning," I said. "I promise you that." She nodded once and left the printout with me and closed the door soft behind her. I sat there a long time after she left, looking at that 15 business day deadline, and I thought about my mother's handwriting and the letter I hadn't reread in 4 years, and I understood, sitting in that quiet office with the presses humming 2 floors below me, that I wasn't going to be able to keep this quiet much longer. Something in that lockbox was about to matter again. I didn't open the lockbox that night. I told myself I needed sleep, and that was true, but it was also true that I was scared of what I already suspected. Some fears you can hold at arm's length as long as the paper's still folded shut. I opened it the next evening instead, at my kitchen table, with a glass of water I didn't touch. The lockbox is small, gray metal, the kind credit unions used to hand out with a new savings account back in the 80s. My mother's name is still on the little card taped inside the lid. Louise Colson. Her handwriting, blue ink, a little slanted to the right. I lifted out the letter first. I'd read it once before, 4 years ago, in Warren's office, my hands not steady than the way they are now. "Danielle, I've watched your brother spend money like it grows back. I've watched your father hand him chances he hasn't earned, because it's easier than saying no to your own son. I won't be here to keep saying no for you. Put your name on what your hands actually build, not the company's name, yours. I'm leaving you $40,000 and Warren Tate's number. Use both. Love, Mom." I sat with that for a minute, the way I always do. $40,000. That's what built Meridian Seal Works. Filing fees, Warren's retainer, the first year of registered agent costs, all of it out of that account. None of it out of Colson's seal and Gasket's books. Clean, separate. Mine. Behind the letter was something I hadn't remembered being there. A second sheet, folded smaller, tucked into the back seam of the box like it had slipped down over time. It wasn't my mother's handwriting. It was a loan document. First National Bank of Ohio letterhead. A collateral pledge form, dated 11 months ago, listing patent number 8,224,410, my resin cure patent, the one Briggs Automotive's whole order depended on, as security against a $280,000 credit line. At the bottom, my signature. Engineering sign-off, Chief Engineer, Danielle Colson. I never signed that. I looked at it under the kitchen light for a long time. The signature was close. Close enough to pass a bank clerk who'd never seen my real one next to it twice. Not close enough to fool Warren Tate, who has 40 years of watching signatures for a living. I don't know how it ended up in my mother's lockbox instead of a bank vault. My best guess, and it's only a guess, is that Trevor needed somewhere private to keep his copy, somewhere Dad wouldn't stumble on it in the house, and he didn't know the lockbox even existed. Nobody did, except me. $280,000. I thought about the number Trevor had mentioned on the loading dock. Dealership loan. I did the math a different way then. If he was underwater on a co-signed loan too, the two debts together were closer to $500,000 sitting on a man who couldn't tell you what a cure ratio was. I called Warren the next morning before I'd even had coffee. I found something, I said. I need you to look at a signature. Whose? Mine. Except it isn't. There was a pause on his end, the kind where I could hear him setting down whatever he'd been holding. Bring it in, he said. Don't email it, don't fax it. Bring it in your hand. I brought it in my hand. Warren held the pledge form up to the window light in his office, the real signature card from our old contracts pulled up beside it on his desk. He didn't say anything for almost a full minute. That's a long time to watch a man not say anything. This isn't yours, he finally said. I know. I mean, it's not close. Whoever did this was rushing or scared or both. He set the page down flat. Danielle, this is bank fraud. Forged collateral on a federally chartered institution's loan. That's not a family argument anymore. That's a crime with a file number. I know that too. You want me to call the bank? I thought about my father on a dock in Sarasota, feet in the water, telling me Trevor had good instincts. I thought about Trevor in the break room telling Hal Dunmore to call him chief. I thought about the 15 business days ticking down on Sherry's desk. Not yet, I said. I want it timed. Warren leaned back. Time to what? The board meeting. Dad put it on the calendar before he left. Full board. First one with Trevor as CEO. I watched Warren's face while I said it, because I wanted to know if he thought I was being cruel. He didn't look like he thought that. He looked like a man doing arithmetic. I want you there, I said. Reading the assignment clause into the record. And I want the bank's compliance office to already have a quiet flag on that file by the time anybody in that room asks a single question. You want it public? Warren said. I want it undeniable, I said. Quiet doesn't work on Trevor. Quiet is what he's been counting on the whole time. Warren picked up his phone and made 2 calls while I sat there. The first was short, to a woman named Renata Osei in First National's Compliance Division, somebody Warren's worked with before on unrelated matters, a person who owed him a favor from a title dispute 2 years back. He didn't accuse anyone of anything on that call. He asked her, formally, on behalf of a client, to confirm whether a specific patent number was properly assigned before her bank finalized any credit action against it. That's all. That's a paper question, not an accusation. She'll run it against the county recorder and the patent office filing, Warren told me after he hung up. It'll come back showing Meridian Steelworks as sole title holder since 3 years ago. Once that hits her desk, the collateral's void on its face, whether or not anybody's proven forgery yet. The forgery piece, that becomes the bank's problem to chase, not yours. And the board meeting? Second call, he said, already dialing. He confirmed with my father's assistant, who still handled the calendar even from a beach chair in Florida, that the meeting was locked for the following Thursday, 9 a.m., full board, no changes. Trevor had asked for it to be moved up a week, apparently, eager to present his growth plan. Nobody had moved it. My father likes routines. Thursday, 9 a.m., same as it had been for 6 years. Thursday, Warren said, hanging up. That gives Renata's office 4 business days to confirm title before the room's even full. I didn't say anything for a second. 4 days felt very short and very long at the same time. You don't have to be in the room when I read it, Warren said. I can do this without you there. I'll be there, I said. I built the thing. I'm not going to hide from the sentence that says so. He nodded like that was the answer he expected. Then I need the original assignment file back from you by Wednesday. Clean copies, dated, notarized, the whole packet, so I'm not standing up there holding a photocopy. I had it already. I'd had it in a fireproof box in my own closet for 3 years, next to nothing else that mattered as much. I drove back to the plant that afternoon and found Sherry at her desk, the First National letterhead notice still sitting where I'd left it, filed under a folder tab that said R&D in my own handwriting. You said I'd get warning, Sherry said, without looking up. You're getting it now, I said, and closed her office door. Thursday's board meeting. Don't schedule anything else that morning, and don't tell Trevor I said that. She looked at me for a long moment, the kind of look you give someone when you've worked 30 years next to a family and you finally understand which member of it you actually trust. Whatever this is, she said, I hope it's fast. It'll be 1 sentence, I told her. Fast as sentences go. She almost smiled at that and went back to her ledger, and I went back out onto the floor where the presses were running the second half of the Briggs order clean, on spec, 98% yield holding steady, built on a patent that had never belonged to the company signing the paychecks. It belonged to me. It had for 3 years. Thursday, everyone else was going to find that out. Trevor found me on the floor Wednesday morning by the 3rd press, where Hal Dunmore had the resin batch running steady at 98%. He waited until Hal walked off toward the mixing room before he said anything. I need a signature, he said. For what? Bank wants an engineering certification. Confirms the patent's sound, confirms it's ours to pledge. Standard language. You've signed 100 of these. I looked at the paper he was holding out. Same First National letterhead. A new line at the bottom, blank, waiting for my name. This is dated today, I said. So if it's standard, why is it dated today and not 11 months ago, when the loan closed? Something moved behind his eyes. Quick, gone just as fast. Banks tightening up their files, he said. Everybody's re-signing stuff this quarter. It's nothing. Inside my head, I was already 3 steps past him. He wasn't trying to get a fresh certification. He was trying to get a real signature to sit next to the one he'd already forged, so if anybody ever compared the two, there'd be a legitimate one on file to point to. Cover the fake with a genuine. Outside, I kept my voice easy. I'll need to review the patent file before I sign anything with my name on it. That's not me being difficult. That's just how I work. It's a formality, Danielle. Then it can wait a formality's worth of time, I said. Leave it with Sherry. I'll get to it. He didn't leave it with Sherry. He folded it back into his jacket pocket, and for just a second, I watched him do the math, the same math I'd already done and not like it. You've been weird lately, he said. I've been running a floor, I said. That'll make anybody weird. He left without saying anything else, and I stood there next to the press, watching the resin cure clean and even, feeling the particular kind of quiet that comes right before something breaks loose. Not calm. Just controlled. Warren called that afternoon. Renata came back early, he said, faster than I expected. And titles confirmed, county recorder, patent office, everything lines up with Meridian. Sole owner, 3 years running. That collateral pledge is void on its face, whether Trevor forged the signature or not. He never had the patent to offer. That's the part we knew, I said. What's the part we didn't? Warren paused, and I heard paper shuffle on his end. Renata pulled the file wider than I asked her to, he said. Standard practice when compliance flags one loan, they check for cross-collateralization. Same borrower, other credit lines, see if the same asset shows up twice. And it did. It did. There's a personal loan on the books at First National, $340,000, co-signed by Trevor 18 months ago for a car dealership that folded 4 months later. That loan's been underwater the whole time. Trevor's name is the only one still good on it. I sat down at my desk. $340,000 on the dealership, $280,000 on the company line he'd forged his way into. I did the sum without wanting to. $620,000, I said. Give or take, Warren said. And here's the part that matters. When Renata's team ran the cross-check, they found your patent number listed as supplemental collateral on an internal risk memo tied to the personal loan too. Not on the loan document itself. Just a note some loan officer wrote down last year, treating the company's IP as backstop for Trevor's personal debt, because he told them he had authority over it. He told a bank he could put my invention up against his car dealership loan. That's what it looks like. I didn't say anything for a second. I thought about Trevor standing on the loading dock telling me the dealership thing was handled. I thought about him in my father's office with his feet on the desk, telling a bank teller 2 weeks, no problem. I thought about him folding that certification back into his jacket an hour ago, still smiling like a man who thought he had time. Does compliance know that yet? I asked. The cross-collateral note? They know now, Warren said. Renata's flagging the whole file for internal fraud review. That's above what either of us pushed for. That one's the bank doing its job. Good, I said, and meant it more than I expected to. Danielle. Warren's voice went quieter. This is bigger than I told you it might be. Once fraud review opens on a federally chartered bank loan, that doesn't stay inside the building. There's a real chance this goes to their legal department, maybe further. I need you to understand that before Thursday, not after. I understand it, I said. Do you want to slow down? Wait for the bank to run its process first? Let the board meeting happen some other week, once the ground's more settled? I thought about that for exactly as long as it took to look out my office window at the loading dock, where the Briggs shipment was staged and ready, 98% yield, my formula, my patent, my name nowhere on the paperwork that said whose company shipped it. No, I said. Thursday stands. My father put that meeting on the calendar himself. I'm not the one who's going to move it. Warren didn't argue. Then I'll have the assignment file ready. Certified copies, dated, notarized. I'll read the clause into the record the second new business opens, before Trevor gets one word of his growth plan out. One more thing, I said. Does my father need to hear any of this before Thursday? From me, I mean, not from a lawyer in a boardroom. There was a long pause on Warren's end, the kind where I could tell he was weighing what kind of daughter I was trying to be as much as what kind of client. That's not a legal question, he finally said. That's a family one. I can't answer it for you. I hung up and sat with that a while. My father was still in Sarasota, still calling every Friday to ask how Trevor was settling into the chair, still telling me that's my girl like it cost him something to say it, which maybe it did. I thought about calling him that night and telling him everything. The forged signature, the $620,000, the patent that had never belonged to the company he'd handed over like a hand-me-down coat. I didn't call him. Some things, I'd learned from my mother, You don't hand somebody early just because it would be kinder to you to put it down. You let the room do it. You let the record read itself out loud in front of the people who need to hear it in their own ears, not secondhand from a phone call the night before. Sherry knocked on my door around 5, holding nothing this time, just herself. Trevor came by asking if I'd seen a form, she said. Some certification. Said he must have left it in your office. He didn't leave it, I said. He's still carrying it around, deciding whether to ask me again. You gonna sign it? No. She nodded slowly, like she'd expected that answer and was relieved to have it confirmed anyway. Thursday, she said. 9 a.m. I already cleared my whole morning like you asked. Didn't tell him why. Thank you, Sherry. You want me in the room? I thought about that. 30 years of her handwriting in the ledgers. 30 years of knowing exactly which invoices told the truth and which ones were dressed up for somebody's benefit. I want you in the room, I said. Every number that gets said out loud Thursday, I want somebody there who already knows if it's real. She almost smiled again, the same almost smile from before, and for the first time in weeks, it didn't look tired around the edges. I'll bring my own coffee, she said. Boardroom stuff tastes like dishwater. She left, and I sat alone with the lamp on, the shop gone quiet below me, presses cooling for the night. I took the little brass key off my ring and set it on the desk in front of me, not to open anything, just to look at it, the way you look at a tool after the job's already most of the way done. 2 more days. My father would be back from Florida by Wednesday night, in time for the meeting he'd scheduled himself, in time to sit at the head of a table and watch a company he thought he still owned get read back to him, clause by clause, in Warren Tate's voice. I turned off the lamp and went home, and for the first time in a long while, I slept the whole night through. Warren's office wasn't the only place I needed to go before Thursday. I still had one drawer of my own life to open. The credit union on Copley sits 2 blocks off the towpath, brick front, same teller since I was in high school. I drove there Wednesday evening with the little brass key already off my ring, sitting in the cup holder like it weighed something. Rosalind at the counter didn't ask questions. She just walked me back to the vault room and left me alone with box 114. I hadn't opened it in 3 years, not since the day I signed Meridian into existence. Inside was exactly what I remembered. A manila envelope, soft at the corners, a cashier's check stub for $40,000, dated the month before my mother died, and the letter. I sat down on the little metal stool they keep in there for people like me, and I read it again, out loud this time, quiet, just for the room. Danielle. If you're reading this, I'm not around to say it to your face, so I'm saying it here instead. I watched your brother spend money like it grows back overnight. I watched your father hand him rope every single time, hoping this would be the year he didn't hang himself with it. I'm not going to fight that battle for you. I'm too tired, and it's not mine to fight anymore. But I built half of what's in that building with my own hands, same as you did, and I am not going to let it end up owned by somebody who never once asked how the resin cures. Put your name on what your hands actually build. Don't wait for anybody to hand it to you. The $40,000 is yours. No strings, no interest, no explaining it to your father. Use it exactly how you see fit. Love, Mom. I folded it back along the same 3 creases it already had. Some things don't need rereading twice in one sitting. $40,000 had opened Meridian's bank account. $40,000 had paid Warren's retainer for the first 18 months, before the company itself could afford real legal work. My mother had done the math on her son, years before any of the rest of us wanted to. I put the letter back, locked the box, and drove home with the windows down, because it was June, and because I needed the air moving. My father called that night, not from Sarasota, from his own kitchen. I'm back, he said, like I hadn't already known from the caller ID flight got in at 4. Your mother's roses are a disaster, by the way. Nobody trimmed them. I trimmed them in April, Dad. Well, they need it again. He cleared his throat. Listen, come to dinner tomorrow night, before the board meeting Thursday morning. I want the three of us at one table before anything official happens. Trevor's coming? Of course Trevor's coming. He's the CEO now. I want to see how he's settling in before he sits at the head of that table for the first time. I said I'd be there. I didn't tell him why Thursday morning already had a shape he couldn't see yet. Dinner was at his house, not a restaurant, which meant it was really my mother's kitchen with my father cooking in it badly. Chicken from a box, green beans from a can, the same meal he'd made every Wednesday since she died, because it was the one meal he actually remembered how to make. Trevor showed up 12 minutes late, tie already loosened, looking like a man who hadn't slept well in some number of nights I could guess at without asking. Big week, Dad said, setting plates down. First board meeting as CEO. You nervous? No, Trevor said, too fast. You should be a little nervous. Keeps you sharp. Dad sat down across from him. I want to talk about something before Thursday, actually. Get it settled while it's just family. I felt my spine go still. My payout, Dad said. Retirement package. Turns out it's not just a pension check. Legal set it up as a consulting arrangement, paid out over 5 years. $11,000 a month, give or take, tied to the company staying current with its credit lines and its bank standing. Nobody explained that part to me clearly until Monday. Trevor's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. Tied to what, exactly? I asked, keeping my voice even. Good standing, Dad said. If the company's in default on anything or under some kind of review, the payments pause until it's resolved. Standard language, apparently. I didn't think twice about it when I signed it 2 years ago. Why would I? We've never missed a payment on anything in this company's history. Trevor set his fork down slow, like the plate might make noise if he wasn't careful. You okay? Dad asked him. Fine, Trevor said, just tired. I looked at my brother across that table and understood something new. It wasn't only his own credit at stake Thursday morning. It was our father's monthly check, too, $11,000 a time, 5 years running, sitting on the same shaky foundation Trevor had built out of a forged signature and a bank that hadn't caught up yet. He'd known that. He'd known it the whole time and said nothing to either of us. Company's solid, Trevor said, too quickly again. Nothing to worry about there. Didn't think there was, Dad said, spooning green beans onto his own plate, oblivious to the sweat starting at Trevor's collar. Just wanted it out in the open before Thursday. Family should know where the money comes from. I almost laughed at that. Family should know where the money comes from. I'd built the whole company's actual value into a name my father had never once asked about, and here he was, worried about disclosure over green beans from a can. Danielle, Dad said, turning to me. You've been quiet. Just listening, I said. Sounds like a good arrangement, as long as everything stays clean. Trevor's eyes came up to mine for just a second. I don't think he could tell if I meant it as comfort or as something sharper. I didn't tell him either. It'll stay clean, Trevor said. I run a tight ship. You've been CEO 9 days, I said, gentle as I could make it sound. Give it time before you call it a ship. Dad laughed at that, actually laughed, the first easy sound I'd heard out of him in weeks. Trevor forced one out too, half a beat behind, the way people laugh when they're not sure if the joke was really about them. We finished dinner on smaller talk after that. The Briggs order, the weather, whether the Indians were any good this year, which they weren't, and hadn't been in a while. And everybody at that table already knew it and said it anyway because it was easier than the truth sitting 3 inches under the tablecloth. I hugged my father goodnight on the porch. He held on a second longer than usual. I'm proud of both of you, he said. You know that. I know, Dad. Thursday's a big day, new chapter for this family. It is, I said, and meant every word of it, just not the way he thought I did. I drove home past the plant on my way, slowed down without meaning to, looked at the building lit up under one security light over the loading dock. 2 miles from a converted rubber mill where 40 guests had watched my father hand my brother something that was already, quietly, mine. Tomorrow the room would be smaller. Just the board. Just the people who needed to hear it read out loud in their own ears. I went home, laid out the notarized copies Warren needed on my kitchen table so I wouldn't forget them in the morning, and set my mother's key back on its ring, next to the one for the plant's side door, the one for my own front door, the one for a shop that didn't have its name on any building yet but would, soon enough, have every reason in the world to. Thursday morning came in gray and warm, the kind of Akron sky that can't decide if it wants rain. I got to the mill offices at 8:15. 45 minutes early. Sherry was already in the boardroom, setting up her own thermos next to the pitcher of ice water somebody from catering had left. She'd worn her good blazer, the green one she kept for tax season and funerals. "You look ready," she said. "I look like somebody going to a meeting," I said. "Same thing today." Warren arrived at 8:30, carrying a leather folder I'd never seen before, thicker than his usual one. He set it on the table like it had weight to it, which it did. "Certified copies," he said quietly. "Notarized last night. I also brought something new." "New like what?" "New like Renata called me at 7 this morning." He didn't sit down yet. The bank's already flagged the loan for internal review. That part's moving faster than either of us expected. But there's a wrinkle. I felt my stomach tighten before he even said it. "Trevor called their commercial lending desk yesterday afternoon," Warren said. "Tried to open conversation on a second line. Bigger one? $500,000. Revolving, structured through an outside investor group called Ashland Capital. He listed the patent portfolio as collateral again. Same patent. He's trying to refinance his way out before the audit lands. That's my read, too." Dad walked in at 8:50, tie straight, hair combed the way my mother used to comb it for him before church. He looked rested. Florida had done that much for him, at least. "Big morning," he said, taking his seat at the head of the table like he still belonged there, which, in a sense, he did. Just not the sense he thought. Trevor came in 2 minutes before 9, and I knew the second I saw him that Warren was right. He was carrying a stack of glossy handouts, bound with a plastic spine, the kind you rush order the night before when you want something to look more finished than it is. "Morning, everybody," he said, setting a packet in front of each chair. "Before we get into normal business, I want to walk through something I think you're all going to be excited about. Inside my head, quiet, flat. He doesn't know yet. He still thinks this is his morning." Out loud, I said, "What's the packet, Trevor?" "Growth plan," he said, smiling the way he used to smile pitching Dad on a new truck he didn't need. "Ashland Capital's ready to extend us a $500,000 revolving line. No personal guarantee needed, because we've got the IP portfolio to back it. This gets us new tooling, maybe a second shift on the Briggs line. I want to vote on it today, first item, before anything else." Dad's face lit up a little at that. "500,000's a real number, Trevor." "It is," Trevor said, "and it's ours if we move fast. Ashland wants a signed term sheet by Friday." I looked at Warren. Warren looked at me. Neither of us said anything yet. "Trevor," I said, keeping my voice even, "before we vote on anything using the company's intellectual property as collateral, don't we need Warren to confirm the company actually holds clear title to that IP?" Trevor's smile didn't move, but something behind his eyes did. Just a flicker. "That's a formality," he said. "We've always held those patents, since Mom and Dad started this place." "Formalities matter," I said, "especially to a bank." "Danielle's right," Dad said, nodding slowly, oblivious to the ground shifting under him. "Warren, you've got the file handy?" "I do," Warren said. Trevor's jaw tightened, just slightly. We don't need to open old paperwork for a routine title check. I can have Renata send confirmation by end of day. Renata already called me this morning, Warren said, about something else. I think it's better we handle this now, while everyone's in the room. Sherry, 3 seats down, hadn't touched her coffee. She was watching Trevor's hands, the way they'd gone still on the table, the way a man's hands go still when he's out of moves and hasn't admitted it to himself yet. Dad, Trevor said, turning, trying a different angle. We can vote on the growth plan first, sort out the paperwork detail after. Ashland's waiting on us. Ashland can wait 1 hour, Dad said, and something in his voice had changed too. Some old instinct from 30 years of running a floor where you never signed anything before you read it twice. Warren, go ahead. Inside my head. This is it. Not the way you planned it exactly, but close enough. Warren opened the leather folder, pulled out the top document, laid it flat, turned it so the table could see the letterhead if they leaned in. Before we discuss any new credit facility, he said, there's something in the existing record that needs to be read into today's minutes. It concerns the company's patent portfolio directly, and I believe it changes the entire premise of the vote you're about to take. Trevor's hand moved toward the stack of glossy handouts like he might scoop them back up, like paper could still fix this if he moved fast enough. Warren, Dad said slowly, what are you talking about? I'm talking about an assignment agreement, Warren said. Executed 3 years ago, recorded with the county and with the patent office, transferring ownership of 6 patents and the associated client contracts out of Coulson Seal and Gasket. The room went quiet in the particular way a room goes quiet when everyone realizes at the same moment that the meeting they walked into is not the meeting they're going to walk out of. Transferring them where? Dad asked. Warren looked at me once, just once, asking without asking if I was still sure. I gave him the smallest nod I had in me. To an entity called Meridian Steelworks LLC, Warren said. Trevor's mouth opened. Nothing came out of it yet. Dad turned to look at me, slow, like his neck had forgotten how that motion worked. Danielle, he said. What is he talking about? I kept my hands folded on the table in front of me, the way I'd practiced without meaning to practice it, some nights lying awake running this exact minute through my head. It's mine, Dad, I said. Meridian's mine. I formed it 3 years ago. You formed a company, Dad said, and didn't tell your own father. I told the patent office, I said. I told the county recorder. I told the bank Meridian uses for its own accounts. I just never told you, because I didn't think you'd have believed me if I said it out loud at your kitchen table. Trevor found his voice then, thin and too fast. This is insane! Dad, she's making this up. This is some kind of, I don't know, some kind of stunt. It's not a stunt, Warren said, calm as a man reading a grocery list. It's a matter of public record. I have certified copies for everyone at this table. He started passing them down. Dad's hands shook slightly, taking his. There's one more thing, Warren said, and I watched Trevor's face go the color it goes right before a person understands they've run out of room to back into. There's a loan, Warren said. First National. $340,000. Personal. Co-signed by Trevor Coulson for a car dealership that failed. There's a company credit line, $280,000, opened using an engineering certification with Danielle's signature on it. A signature Danielle didn't write. Dad set the copy down on the table like it had gotten too heavy to hold. Trevor, he said, and his voice had gone somewhere I'd never heard it go before. Somewhere quiet and cold and very, very far from Florida. Trevor stood up so fast his chair scraped back hard against the floor. I can explain the loan, he said. Dad, I can explain all of it. Then explain it, Dad said. Right now. In front of everybody who's sitting at this table. Trevor's throat worked like a man trying to swallow a stone. It's not what it sounds like, he said. The loan for the dealership, that's mine. That's on me personally. That's got nothing to do with Coulson Seal and Gasket. Then why, Warren said, does the collateral schedule attached to it list a patent belonging to this company? Because the bank asked for collateral and I gave them what we had. What we had, Dad repeated. Flat. Quiet. There's no we in this, Trevor. Not if the patent wasn't the company's to give. Inside my head, calm. There it is. He just said the sentence himself. I didn't even have to hand it to him. Out loud, I said nothing. I let the silence do the part I used to think words had to do. Trevor's eyes swung to me, pleading in a way I hadn't seen since we were kids and he'd broken something of Dad's in the garage. Danielle. Come on. You know I wouldn't forge your signature. Tell them that's crazy. I didn't sign anything for a bank loan, I said. Not for a dealership, not for anybody's revolving line. I'd remember signing my own name. Somebody's engineering certification is on that paperwork, Warren said, sliding a copy toward Dad, toward Sherry, toward the empty seat where the CFO usually sat, but hadn't shown up to yet this morning. It carries Danielle's license number. Her signature block, dated 14 months ago. Sherry picked hers up first, read it twice, set it down like it had a smell to it. That's not her signature, Sherry said. I've watched her sign 100 purchase orders. That D doesn't loop like that. Sherry, Trevor said, you're an office manager, not a handwriting expert. I'm also not blind, she said, and didn't look at him again after that. Dad hadn't moved. He was staring at the certified copy of the assignment agreement, the one with Meridian's name typed clean across the top, like if he read it slow enough the letters might rearrange themselves back into something he recognized. Danielle, he said finally. 3 years. You've had this 3 years and never said one word. I said it to the people who needed to know, I said. The recorder's office, the patent office, Renata when Meridian opened its own account. I didn't hide anything, Dad. I just didn't hand it to you on a plate because you'd already decided who got the plate before I ever built it. He flinched at that. Actual flinch, shoulders coming in an inch, like the words had weight and landed somewhere soft. That's not fair, he said. It's not unfair either, I said. It's just true. Trevor was still standing, hands braced on the table now, knuckles gone pale. This doesn't change anything about the CEO position, he said, voice climbing. I'm still CEO of this company. Whatever's in some LLC doesn't change my title. Your title, Warren said, runs a company that no longer holds the patents its own product line depends on. No longer holds 3 of its 5 largest client contracts, which were re-executed with Meridian 18 months ago when those clients renewed. What you're the CEO of, as of this morning, is a building, some equipment, and a payroll. The room had gone the kind of quiet where you can hear the ice machine running down the hall. You're telling me, Dad said slowly, that Coulson Seal and Gasket doesn't own its own patents. That's what I'm telling you, Warren said. Since when? Since a filing 3 years ago that I personally notarized at Danielle's request, and have kept in escrow every year since, per her instruction, to be disclosed the moment there was a change in company leadership that made disclosure necessary. Dad turned to me, not angry yet. Just lost. The way a man looks when the floor he stood on for 50 years turns out to have been someone else's floor the whole time. You planned this, he said. For 3 years. You planned this exact morning. I planned to protect what I built, I said. I didn't plan Trevor. He did that part on his own. I watched something in Trevor's face go from panic to something uglier, something cornered. This is a joke, he said. This is some kind of, I don't know, some kind of power play. Warren, whose side are you even on here? I represent the company, Warren said. Whichever entity that turns out to be. That was when Warren's phone buzzed on the table, face up, screen lit with a name I recognized from every conversation he'd walked me through since April. Renata Volkov, First National. He glanced at it, glanced at me, answered it on speaker because there was nothing left in that room worth keeping private anymore. Warren Tate, he said. Warren, it's Renata. Sorry to call in to what I'm guessing is a meeting. I've got compliance on the line with me. We need to talk about the Coulson Seal and Gasket Credit Facility and about a second application that came in yesterday under an Ashland Capital referral. Trevor's face drained another shade. Go ahead, Warren said. There's a board here. They should hear this. A second voice came on, crisper, official. This is Marcus Odom, Fraud Compliance. We flagged an inconsistency this morning between the collateral schedule on the existing 340 facility and a patent assignment recorded with Summit County 3 years ago. The patent listed as collateral is not titled to Coulson Seal and Gasket. It's titled to an entity called Meridian Steelworks. We've placed a freeze on the existing line effective immediately, pending review, and we will not be proceeding with the Ashland referred application. Dad sat back in his chair like somebody had let air out of him. There's also the matter, Odom said, of a certification document bearing an engineer's license number that doesn't match the signature we have on file for that engineer. We'll need to speak with Ms. Coulson directly, and we'll be referring the loan file to our internal fraud unit. Referring it, Dad said. To who exactly? Internal counsel, to start. Depending what they find, it may go further than that. Trevor's chair scraped again as he sat down hard, like his legs had stopped being reliable. He put both hands over his face for a second, just a second, and when he took them away, he looked 10 years older than the man who'd walked in 9 days ago, wearing the tie he'd worn to become CEO. I can fix this, he said, to nobody in particular. I can pay it back. I've got equity in the house. I can restructure. Trevor, Dad said. Just his name. Nothing else needed adding to it. Warren ended the call gently, the way you'd set down something breakable. The board should take a short recess, he said. There's a lot here to absorb, and Danielle and I still have paperwork on the Meridian side that needs walking through properly, in private, before anyone makes a decision about anything today. Dad didn't argue. He just nodded, slow, still looking at the assignment agreement like it might change its mind if he stared at it long enough. Sherry stood first, gathered her copy of everything into a neat stack, and looked at me across the table with something that wasn't quite a smile but wasn't far off it either. I'll get the coffee refreshed, she said, like that was still a normal thing anybody in that room needed. Maybe it was. Some habits are the only floor left standing when everything else gives. I stayed in my seat while people filed out for the recess, Trevor last, moving like a man walking to a car he didn't want to get into. Dad lingered by the door. Danielle? He said. Yeah, Dad. Did your mother know? About Meridian? I thought about the lockbox key on my ring. About 3 creases in a letter I'd read maybe 40 times since March. She's the reason it exists, I said. He didn't ask anything else. He just nodded once, like a man setting something down he'd been carrying wrong for a long time, and walked out to find whatever version of steady he still had left in him. I sat there a minute longer, alone with the empty water pitcher and the stack of glossy Ashland packets nobody would ever open again, and let myself feel, for just a second, exactly as tired as I actually was. Then I picked up my copy of the assignment agreement, folded it once along a crease that hadn't been there before, and went to find Warren because there was still a lot of morning left, and none of it was going to finish itself. My father handed my brother the company I built with my own 2 hands, in front of 40 guests, and said, "You're the face, he's the boss now." I didn't argue. I raised my glass and said congratulations. What nobody in that room knew was that 3 years earlier, I had already moved every patent and every contract into a name of my own choosing, So the company my brother inherited that night owned nothing but the building and the machines. His first board meeting would end with a lawyer reading one line out loud and my father's face going the color of old invoice paper. My name is Danielle Colson, and I was 34. I did not scream. I did not beg. Warren caught up with me in the hallway outside the conference room, near the vending machine that never had enough quarters change. He kept his voice low. "You holding up okay?" "I'm fine," I said. And I mostly was. My hands weren't shaking. That surprised me more than it should have. "Odom's going to want a statement from you," Warren said, "about the certification, sooner rather than later. Give him whatever he needs. I've got nothing to hide. I know that." He doesn't yet. Dad found me a few minutes later, standing by the window at the end of the hall, looking out at the parking lot like it belonged to somebody else's building now. He had the assignment agreement still folded in his hand. "Your mother's handwriting was on the margin of this thing," he said. "Small. I almost missed it. Says good D." Just those 2 words. "She wrote in the margins of everything," I said. "Recipes, tax forms, my report cards. When did she tell you to do this?" "She didn't tell me anything, Dad. She left me a letter, after she died. I didn't open the lockbox for almost a year." He nodded slowly like he was trying to fit that into a shape he already understood and couldn't quite manage it. "I should have listened to her more," he said, "about Trevor. She used to say he spent money like it apologized for something. She never said that to me. She said it to me more than once." He looked down at the paper again. I didn't want to hear it. I didn't have anything comforting to hand him, so I didn't try. We reconvened 20 minutes later. Sherry had refilled the coffee like she said she would, and nobody touched it. Trevor sat 2 seats further from Dad than he had that morning, like distance might help. The CFO, a quiet woman named Priya who'd been out sick, had finally slipped in and was reading the packet Warren gave her with the flat, careful face of someone doing math she didn't like. Dad's phone buzzed before he could open his mouth. He glanced at the screen, frowned, and answered it on speaker without asking anyone. Frank Colson. "Frank, it's Ed Rourke." The voice filled the room, easy, familiar, a man who'd bought seals from this company for 11 years. "Got a strange call from my legal department this morning. Somebody at First National reached out about our supply contract. Said the IP behind it might be sitting with a different company than the one on our paperwork." Dad's jaw tightened. "Ed, we're sorting some internal matters out today." "I don't care about internal," Ed said, not unkindly. "I care about who I renew with in September. That's $2.1 million a year for us, Frank. I need a name on a signature line I can trust." Every head at the table turned toward me at the same moment, like it was choreographed. "The contract renews with Meridian Steelworks," I said. "It has since your last renewal, 18 months ago. Same engineering, same tolerances, same person who's been on your line calls for 6 years." There was a pause on the line. "That'd be you, Danielle. That's me, Ed." "Then I've got no problem," he said. "Never did. Just needed to hear it out loud from somebody who isn't guessing." He hung up before anyone could say anything else, the way men who've made up their minds tend to. Trevor's ears had gone red. He didn't say a word. "That's your $2.1 million, Warren said quietly to the table. "Confirmed this morning. It was never in question. Danielle's the one who saved that order, incidentally, before any of you were awake. Recalibrated a cure ratio on the Briggs line at 6 a.m. I don't perform," I said when Dad looked at me like he wanted me to say more. "I build the thing that works. That's all that call was." Priya set her copy of the packet down. "I need to say something as CFO," she said. "If Meridian holds the patents and the major contracts, then what we're actually voting on today isn't a growth plan. It's whether this company has a future that doesn't run through Danielle." Nobody answered that right away. I'm not trying to strand anybody, I said. I didn't do this to burn the plant down. I did it because I watched a bank almost get handed a patent that wasn't the company's to give, using my name, and I wasn't going to let that happen twice. Twice? Dad repeated. There's a second loan, Warren said. Smaller. Equipment financing, taken out 4 months ago. Same forged certification. We only found it because Renata's team ran a full name match this week, past what compliance usually checks. Trevor's hands went flat on the table again, pressing down like he could hold the table still even if nothing else was. I was going to pay all of it back, he said. His voice had lost the CEO register completely. It sounded like the voice he'd had at 19, explaining a dented fender. The dealership was supposed to work. Grant said the location was solid. I believed him. You believed a friend over a bank statement, Dad said, for $340,000. I didn't want to come to you and admit I'd failed at something, Trevor said. You already had a golden kid, Dad. It just wasn't me, and it never was. The room went very still. Even Sherry looked down at her hands. That's not fair to Danielle, Dad said, quiet now, no heat in it, which somehow made it land harder. She didn't take anything from you. She built something you didn't know existed because you never once asked her what she was building. I asked her all the time what she was doing at that shop till 9 at night. Asking isn't the same as caring what the answer was, I said. Trevor didn't argue that one. Warren cleared his throat, the sound of a man about to move a meeting back onto rails. Where this leaves the board today, he said, is a decision about interim leadership at Colson Seal and Gasket, separate from whatever arrangement exists with Meridian. The bank will want clarity on both before it unfreezes anything. I'm not stepping down, Trevor said too fast, like the words had been loaded and waiting. Trevor, Dad said, you forged your sister's signature on 2 loan documents. That's not a personnel matter I can vote around. It's not what it looks like. It's exactly what it looks like, Priya said gently, like she almost felt sorry saying it. I've seen the schedules. Dad turned the folded assignment agreement over once in his hands, like he was deciding something with the motion itself. I'm calling a formal vote, he said, on removing Trevor as CEO, effective today, pending the bank's review. I'll chair operations myself until we've got a real plan. He looked at me, and for the first time all morning, there was something almost like asking in it, not ordering. Danielle, would you sit at this table as part of that plan? Not as the face, as whatever you actually want the title to say. I thought about Meridian's little office, the quiet hum of the shop 2 miles away that only had 4 employees on payroll and 1 framed photo of my mother above the parts rack. I thought about how good it had felt to say, "That's me," Ed into a speakerphone without asking anybody's permission first. I'll think about it, I said. But I'm not folding Meridian back into this building just because today got hard for everybody else. Dad nodded slowly, like that was a fair enough answer for one morning, and called the vote. Dad called for a show of hands, which felt almost quaint given everything that had just happened on speakerphone. Priya raised hers first. Then Sherry. Then 2 outside board members I barely knew, men who'd sat through a dozen of these meetings without saying much, both nodding like men glad to finally have something clear to vote on. Trevor didn't raise his hand for the motion. He didn't raise it against either. He just sat there, staring at the grain of the table like it might tell him something the room wouldn't. Trevor, Dad said, you get a vote too, on my own removal. On the record, Dad said. That's how this works. Trevor raised his hand, slow, like it cost him something physical. No, he said, for the record. No. Noted, Dad said. Motion carries 5-1. Effective today, I'm chairing operations until the board names a permanent replacement. Nobody clapped. Nobody said congratulations. It wasn't that kind of room anymore. Boss. That was the word Dad had used at the party, the word that had sat in my chest for 9 days like a stone I couldn't put down. Trevor had liked being called boss more than he'd ever liked doing the job of one. Now the word just sat on the table between us, empty, waiting for somebody to want it again. Warren's phone buzzed a second time. He looked at it, then at Dad, then decided the room had already survived worse today. "It's Renata again," he said, and put it on speaker. "Sorry, one more thing," she said. "Compliance pulled the file on the equipment loan too, the smaller one. 96,000, taken out in March. It's got a personal guarantee attached." "A guarantee on what?" Dad said. "On a residence. 640 Aldridge Court." Comes back to a Trevor and Melissa Colson. The room went quiet in a different way than before. Not shocked exactly. Tired. The way you get tired hearing a familiar name attached to a new kind of trouble. Trevor's hands came up off the table like they'd touched something hot. "That loan's not in default," he said. "I've made every payment." "You have," Renata said. "Nobody's saying you haven't. But if the underlying collateral schedule turns out to be fraudulent, the guarantee doesn't just vanish. It follows the loan. Your house is still attached to a document with a forged engineering signature on it." "Melissa doesn't know about any of this," Trevor said, quieter now, almost to himself. "She's on the guarantee too," Renata said. "Her signature's on page 4. I watched something in Trevor's face go somewhere I hadn't seen it go before. Not anger, not even fear exactly. Something closer to the look of a man doing math he should have done 4 months ago, watching the number come out worse every time he ran it. "I need to call her," he said. "You can step out," Dad said. "We'll wait." Trevor didn't move right away. He looked at Warren, then at me, like one of us might have a version of this that didn't end with his wife's name on a bank guarantee. "Did you know about the house?" he asked me. "When you did all this, did you know it had come back on her too?" "I didn't build the guarantee, Trevor," I said. "I built the patents. You're the one who put her name on a piece of paper with a signature that wasn't mine." He didn't have an answer for that. He got up and walked out into the hallway with his phone already halfway to his ear, and through the glass door, I watched him stop by the vending machine, the same one with the broken change slot, and just stand there a second before he dialed. Priya waited until the door swung shut. "I want to raise something else," she said, "while we're all still here." "Go ahead," Dad said. "Colson Seal and Gasket's payroll runs on a credit line that's now frozen," she said. "We've got 3 weeks of runway in operating cash before that becomes a real problem. If Meridian holds the contracts, the plant can still run product. But somebody needs to formalize a services agreement between the two entities, or we don't have a legal basis for the plant to keep making anything at all." Everyone looked at me again, that same choreography as before. "I already had Warren draft one," I said. "Back in April. It's been sitting ready, in case a day like today ever happened." Dad let out a breath that wasn't quite a laugh. "Of course it has," he said. "I didn't build Meridian to punish anybody," I said. "I built it so the work wouldn't be homeless if something like this happened. Today's the reason I built it." Warren slid a folder across the table, thin, unmarked. "Service agreement," he said. "Meridian licenses the patents and contracts back to the plant, at cost plus a management fee. Keeps 140 people on payroll starting Monday. Danielle signed her side of it in April. It just needs the plant's signature now." Dad opened the folder and read for a minute, longer than he needed to, like he was using the silence to get his footing back. "You did all this in April," he said, "before your mother's funeral was even 4 years past." "She's the one who told me to," I said. "Not in April. 3 years before that. I just finally had a reason to use it." He signed it without arguing. Some things, by the end of a morning like that one, stop needing an argument. The recess stretched longer than planned. Sherry came back in at some point to say a call had come through the front office, from the Summit County Recorder, confirming receipt of Warren's request for certified copies of the assignment filing. Nothing final yet, just a confirmation that the paperwork existed, that it had existed for 3 years, filed and dated and waiting for anybody who ever bothered to look. "They'll have the certified copies by Thursday," Warren said, "for whatever that's worth to anybody in this room." "It's worth a lot," Dad said. "It means none of what happened this morning is a story somebody made up on the fly." "It never was," I said. Through the glass, I could see Trevor still on the phone, one hand braced against the wall now, head down. I couldn't hear the words. I didn't need to. I'd made calls like that myself once, a long time ago, standing in a hallway trying to explain to somebody I loved why the ground had moved without asking either of us first. Priya excused herself to start drafting a client memo, something calm and boring to send out before rumors did the job worse. The 2 outside board members left together, already talking logistics in the low voice men use when they think a meeting is really over. Sherry gathered cups nobody had touched a second time, and Dad stayed in his chair, folder closed in front of him, looking older than he had at breakfast. "I keep thinking about the toast," he said, "to nobody in particular, maybe to me. You're the face, he's the boss now." I said that in front of 40 people. You did. I meant it as a compliment. To you. Your face is the one everybody trusts when something's wrong on that floor. "I know what you meant by it," I said. "It still cost me something to hear it." "I know that now, too," he said. "Little late, maybe." Trevor came back in before I could answer that. His face had gone the color of the invoice paper his own had turned earlier, pale under fluorescent light, phone still loose in his hand like he'd forgotten to put it away. "She's driving here," he said. "Melissa, she wants to see the guarantee herself." "That's fair," Dad said. "She asked me one thing," Trevor said, and his voice cracked on it. Just slightly. Just enough. "She asked if I forged Danielle's name because I thought Danielle wouldn't notice, or because I thought she wouldn't say anything if she did." Nobody in the room offered him an answer to that. It wasn't ours to give. "What did you tell her?" I asked. "I told her I didn't know," he said. "That's the truth. I don't know which one it was." He sat back down at the far end of the table, alone, waiting for his wife to arrive and read 4 pages he probably should have read to her himself months ago. Dad reached over and set a hand flat on the folder between them, not on Trevor, just near him, the way you'd sit close to somebody in a waiting room without needing to say anything useful. I gathered my copy of the service agreement, my copy of the assignment filing, my coat off the back of the chair, and walked out past the vending machine that still didn't have enough quarters change toward the parking lot where the morning light had gone flat and ordinary, like nothing unusual had happened in that building at all. Melissa's car pulled into the lot before I made it to mine. A gray sedan parked crooked, like she hadn't bothered lining it up. She got out fast, folder in one hand, phone in the other. "Danielle." She said my name like a question and an accusation at once. "Melissa. Is it true? The house?" "It's true," I said. "Your name's on page 4. Same as his." She looked down at the folder like it might have changed since she read it in the car. $96,000, she said, attached to a signature that isn't even real. "I didn't sign it," I said. "Neither did you, not really. He used both our names without asking either of us." "I believe you," she said. Fast. No hesitation. "I've believed you for about an hour now, actually. Ever since I called the bank myself." That stopped me. "You called them?" I wanted to hear it from someone who wasn't my husband. She almost laughed. No humor in it. "A woman named Renata Vance told me everything. Very calm about it, like she'd said it 3 times already today." "She has," I said. Melissa nodded slowly, like she was filing that away too. "He told me the dealership was a sure thing. He told me Grant had it handled. He told me a lot of things, Danielle." She looked toward the building. I'm not here to yell at you. I didn't think you were. I'm here because somebody in that room needs to look at him and not blink. She squared the folder against her hip. That's not going to be my father-in-law today, and it's clearly not going to be Trevor. She walked past me into the building without waiting for a response. I didn't follow. Some rooms you build. Some rooms you just have to let happen without you. I sat in my car for a minute before I started the engine. My phone buzzed. Warren, Renata's compliance team is formalizing the fraud referral this afternoon. Wanted you to hear it from me before it hits your father's inbox. I typed back one line. Send me the case number when it's assigned. He replied almost instantly. Already have it. First National Fraud Review, Case 4471. They're also pulling Trevor's dealership guarantor, a Grant Ashby, into the same file. Apparently, his signature shows up twice on paperwork he says he never saw. Grant Ashby. The friend with the sure thing. I hadn't met him. I'd only ever heard his name the way you hear weather, something happening somewhere else, to somebody else, until it wasn't. I drove to Meridian instead of home. 2 miles down the towpath corridor, past the plant, past the loading dock where the Briggs order was already rolling out on schedule, 4 trucks lined up like nothing that morning had touched them at all. Meridian's building was smaller than the plant by a wide margin. 1 floor. A sign my mother would have called plain and I called honest. 4 employees on payroll, like Dad had said, though what he didn't know was that 2 of the 4 had been Coulson employees first. Engineers I'd quietly recruited over 18 months because they were good and because nobody at the main building had noticed them leaving. Frank Halloway was one of them. Late 50s, 30 years in rubber compounding, hands permanently stained the color of the parts he made. He looked up from a bench when I walked in. Heard the board meeting ran long, he said. You heard right. Heard your brother's not CEO anymore either. You heard that too. He set down the caliper he'd been holding. Ed Rourke's people called here 20 minutes ago. Wanted our compounding schedule for August, said they wanted it locked before the renewal goes through in writing. He almost smiled. They asked for you by name, not the company. You. That was the part nobody at the party had understood, standing in that rented rubber mill hall with their good shoes on. It was never about a title. Ed Rourke didn't care what the letterhead said. He cared who answered the phone at 6 in the morning and knew the cure ratio without opening a binder. Tell them I'll have it to them by Friday, I said. Already did, Frank said. Figured you'd say yes. I walked to the back of the shop, past the parts rack, to the small framed photo on the wall above it. My mother, maybe 40 in the picture, hard hat under one arm, standing in front of the original Coulson building the year it opened, back when the company was 2 people and a folding table instead of 140 and a boardroom. Put your name on what your hands actually build. That's what her letter had said from the lockbox at the credit union 3 years back, in handwriting I still recognized on sight, even faded. I hadn't understood, reading it the first time, how literal she meant it. I understood now. Meridian wasn't spite. It was inheritance, just not the kind anybody puts in a will. My phone buzzed again. Not Warren this time. Dad. Melissa's here. She's asking Trevor questions I don't think he has answers for. I think you should know the board's going to want a permanent decision on leadership by end of month, not just today's vote. I'd like you to actually think about it, not as a favor to me. I looked at the message for a long moment before I answered. I'll think about it. Actually think this time, not just say it. That's more than I probably deserve as an answer, he wrote back. I'll take it. Frank was watching me from across the shop, not pretending not to. Everything all right? Working on it, I said. He nodded, went back to the caliper, the kind of man who didn't need every answer spelled out to trust you were handling it. I stood there another minute under my mother's picture, thinking about 140 people on a payroll 2 miles away who were going to make product on Monday, whether or not anyone in that boardroom had settled a single thing about titles. The work didn't wait on a family to sort itself out. It never had. That was the whole reason Meridian existed in the first place, sitting quiet for 3 years, doing nothing but holding a name steady until the day it was needed. I still had Frank's compounding schedule to finish, and the Rourke renewal to lock before Friday, and somewhere behind me, 2 miles up the corridor, a family finding out exactly what it costs when you build something and hand the credit to somebody else. I had work to do either way. Frank had already gone back to his bench by the time my phone rang again. Warren, not texting this time, calling. "You should sit down," he said. "I'm standing next to a curing press." Close enough. Grant Ashby called my office 10 minutes ago. Not Trevor's lawyer. Grant himself. I set down the schedule sheet. What did he want? "To talk before the bank calls him first," Warren said. "He says Trevor came to him in February with paperwork already filled out. Said it was standard co-signer language. Grant signed where Trevor pointed. He didn't read it. He says he trusted him. His words, not mine." I looked at the photo of my mother on the wall, hard hat under her arm, and thought about how many people over the years had trusted Trevor because trusting him was easier than checking his math. "How much is Grant into this for?" I asked. $180,000, Warren said. "On the dealership note alone. He thought he was covering inventory financing. Turns out part of that 180 was collateralized against equipment that was never his to pledge in the first place. Coulson Equipment. 2 injection molds," Warren said, "titled to Meridian since 2023. Grant didn't know that. Trevor didn't tell him either. I felt that specific quiet click you get when a number finally lines up with a name. Grant hadn't just co-signed a bad loan. He'd unknowingly guaranteed collateral that belonged to a company he'd never heard of, run by a sister he'd never met. "Is he willing to say that to the bank?" I asked. "He already did," Warren said. "Renata Vance took his statement an hour ago. He's cooperating. Full disclosure in writing. Why would he do that? It only makes it worse for him. Because right now, he's a victim who got fooled," Warren said. "If he stays quiet and it comes out later, he's a co-conspirator who helped hide it. He did the math. Fast. Faster than Trevor had, in his whole life, probably. There's more," Warren said. "Renata wants to schedule you. Formal interview. Not an accusation, just a statement, since your name and signature are on the documents that got forged. When? Tuesday, 10 a.m., First National's compliance office downtown." "I'll be there," I said. "I figured. I told her that before you said it." He hung up, and I stood there a second with the phone still warm in my hand, thinking about how many people that morning had needed somebody to just say yes so they could move on to the next hard thing. Frank glanced over from his bench, saw my face, and went back to his caliper without asking. Some men know when a question would only slow you down. I finished the Rourke compounding schedule standing at the counter, numbers I could have done blind after 15 years, cure ratios and batch times lining up clean on the page. It steadied me more than it should have. I don't perform, I thought. I build the thing that works. Even that morning, with half my family's finances unraveling 2 miles away, the numbers still did what numbers do. They didn't lie, and they didn't need forgiving. My phone buzzed once more before I left the shop. Dad again. "Board wants a special session Friday, permanent leadership vote. Trevor's asked to be removed from consideration voluntarily before anyone makes him." I read that twice. "He said that himself?" I wrote back. "Melissa made him say it," Dad wrote, in front of me. She said if he tried to hang on to the title after this morning, she was done pretending she hadn't seen the loan papers. I could picture it. Melissa standing in that same conference room, arms crossed, voice flat and done, and Trevor finally saying out loud what everyone else had already decided about him hours earlier. Friday then, I wrote. They want you to consider it. The title. For real this time. I didn't answer right away. I drove home instead, past the towpath, past the plant lit up gold in the late afternoon, the way it always got this time of year, machines still running because 140 people still needed a paycheck, regardless of what happened to any Coulson's last name. That night, Priya called, calm as ever, the way she got when she'd already drafted 3 versions of something before dialing. Client memo went out an hour ago, she said. Framed it as a leadership transition. No mention of the forgery, no mention of Meridian by name. Good. Ed Rourke's assistant already called back, she said. Wanted to confirm the compounding schedule was still coming from you personally. I told her it always had been. What did she say to that? She laughed, Priya said. Said, quote, that explains a lot about why the parts never come back wrong. It was such a small thing to hear, and it landed harder than it should have. Years of being called the face, like that meant something decorative, and here was a purchasing assistant 3 states away who'd apparently known the whole time who actually kept her orders running clean. There's one more thing, Priya said. Renata's team flagged the equipment loan file to the county recorder too. Independent confirmation. Meridian's title on those 2 molds is dated 11 months before Trevor ever signed anything with Grant's name next to his. So, there's no argument left that it was some kind of accident. There wasn't much of one to begin with, Priya said. But no. Now there's a date stamp that ends the conversation. I thanked her, hung up, and sat at my kitchen table a long time with the lockbox key still on my ring where it had lived for 3 years. The metal gone smooth from my thumb running over it without thinking. My mother used to say numbers don't lie, but people forget people can still lie about numbers for a while. Just not forever. Not once somebody finally opens the box and looks. Friday was 5 days away. Enough time for a bank's fraud review to file paperwork, for Grant Ashby to keep talking, for Trevor to sit in a house with his wife and figure out what was left standing once you took away the title, the loan, and the story he'd told himself for months about being the one finally in charge. I didn't know yet what I'd say when the board asked me straight out to take the name they'd never wanted on the door in the first place. I only knew that whatever I said, it wouldn't be for them. It would be for a woman in a hard hat in an old photograph who'd told me a long time ago to put my name on what my hands actually built, and who'd have laughed, quiet and satisfied, at exactly how long it had taken everyone else to notice I already had. Tuesday morning, I drove downtown instead of to the plant. First National's compliance office sat on the 9th floor, glass walls, a view of the Y Bridge and the river doing what it always does, slow and brown and unbothered by what any Coulson was going through that week. Renata Vance met me at the elevator herself. Small woman, gray suit, handshake like she meant it. Thank you for coming in, she said. This won't take long. It took 90 minutes. I told her what I knew. The forged signature on page 4. The 2 injection molds titled to Meridian since 2023. The date stamp that ended any argument about accidents. She wrote most of it down by hand, old-fashioned, like she didn't trust a keyboard to keep up with the truth. I want to show you something, she said near the end, and slid a folder across the table. Not Trevor's loan file. A different one. Your father co-signed a home equity line in March, she said. $60,000. Listed as a gift to help Trevor with, quote, temporary cash flow. I looked at the signature at the bottom. My father's, not forged, his own hand, shaky in a way I hadn't noticed at the party. He knew, I said. He knew before the retirement dinner. He knew Trevor needed money, Renata said. I can't tell you if he knew why. But $60,000 of that home equity line went straight into paying down interest on the dealership note 2 weeks before your father stood up and gave your brother a company. I sat with that a minute. 40 guests. A rented rubber mill hall. My father's voice saying, "You're the face, he's the boss now," like it was a kindness, like it cost him nothing to say it. It had cost him $60,000, and he'd said it anyway. "Does he know you're telling me this?" I asked. "He signed a disclosure authorization Friday," Renata said. "He wanted us to tell you." His words were, and I'm reading this back to you exact, "She should hear it from someone who isn't me." That sounded like him. Never quite able to say the hard thing himself, always finding somebody else's mouth to put it in. Warren had done it for years. Now a compliance officer in a gray suit was doing it too. "There's a formal freeze on the equipment loan effective this morning," Renata said, "and a separate flag on your father's account, since the $60,000 traces to a note that used forged collateral downstream. He's not being accused of anything, but the money's connected, and connected money gets looked at." "What happens to him?" I asked. "Nothing criminal," she said. "He's a co-signer who didn't know the collateral chain was compromised. Worst case, he eats some of that $60,000 as a loss if the dealership liquidation doesn't cover it." She closed the folder. Worst case for Trevor is different. How different? Grant Ashby's full statement names him specifically. 2 accounts, both showing intent, not confusion. Compliance doesn't decide criminal referral, but I'll tell you what I told your sister-in-law an hour ago. This isn't going away with an apology. I left the building into a wind coming hard off the river, the kind that gets under a coat in July when you don't expect it, and sat in my car a long time before I called Priya. "He put his own house on the line," I said, before she even said hello. "For Trevor." "I heard," she said. "Quiet. Renata's office copied us on the disclosure this morning. Did you know?" "No," Priya said. "I don't think anybody did except your father and whoever drew up that home equity paperwork in March. He didn't tell the board. He didn't tell Warren. He definitely didn't tell you. Why would he do that? Because he's spent 30 years thinking love and money are the same instrument," Priya said. "You pick up wherever the other one's short." It was the kind of thing my mother would have said, except she'd have said it with a laugh at the end, tired and a little disgusted, the way she talked about anything that cost the company more than it earned. Priya said it flat, like a diagnosis. Friday came faster than I wanted it to. The board convened at 9, same room as before, same long table, same folder of minutes Warren kept squared at his elbow. Dad sat at the head like always, except he looked smaller in the chair than he had at his own retirement dinner 3 weeks earlier, like the last 3 weeks had taken something out of him that a suit couldn't put back. Trevor wasn't at the table. He sat in the second row of chairs against the wall, the way you'd seat somebody who used to run things and didn't anymore. Melissa sat beside him, spine straight, hand not touching his. "We're here for one item," Warren said, once the room settled. "Permanent leadership. The board needs a name by end of session." Nobody said anything for a second. Dad cleared his throat like he was going to fill the silence the way he always had, and then, for once in his life, he didn't. He looked at me instead. "Danielle," he said, "I'd like to hear from you before anyone votes on anything." I stood up. Not because it was dramatic, because sitting felt like hiding, and I was done with that. "I'm not taking the title," I said. Somebody down the table, one of the 2 board members who'd voted with Dad 3 weeks ago, started to say something, and I kept going before he could. Not because I don't want to run something. I already run something. I set a folder on the table, thinner than Warren's, 1 page inside it. Meridian Steelworks has held every patent this company uses for 3 years. Every client contract renewed since 2023 runs through Meridian, not through Colson. Ed Rourke's account, the Briggs order, all of it. Colson Seal and Gasket owns a building and some machines. It hasn't owned its own product in 3 years. The room did the thing rooms do when a fact lands that nobody can argue with. Went quiet, then loud all at once, 6 people talking over each other, and Warren letting it happen for a full 10 seconds before he raised one hand. "It's true," he said. "I recorded the assignment myself. Danielle asked me to keep it quiet until it mattered. I told her 3 weeks ago that it mattered now. Dad wasn't talking. He was looking at me the way you look at a bill you already knew was coming but still didn't want opened in front of witnesses. So what happens to this company? He asked, quiet, just to me, like the rest of the table had disappeared. Coulson Seal and Gasket keeps making parts, I said. Meridian licenses it the right to keep doing that. Same terms Ed Rourke and every other client already signed off on without knowing the difference. Nobody loses their job Monday. I made sure of that a long time ago. And Trevor, he said. I looked at my brother, sitting against the wall like a man waiting for a verdict he already knew. Trevor's not my decision to make, I said. He forged a signature and pledged assets that were never his to pledge. That's a bank's problem and possibly a prosecutor's, not a board vote. Melissa didn't look at Trevor. She looked at me and nodded once, small, like she'd been waiting 3 weeks for somebody to say it plainly in a room that couldn't pretend not to have heard it. Warren didn't wait for the room to settle before he kept going. There's a formal notice, he said. First National froze the equipment-backed credit line this morning. $180,000 pending fraud review. Compliance is referring the signature question to internal counsel. One of Dad's 2 loyalists, a heavy-set man named Callahan who'd sat on the board since before I was born, leaned forward. Referring it where, exactly? Wherever forged documents go, Warren said. That's not board business. That's a bank's business, and possibly a prosecutor's. Callahan looked at Trevor like he was trying to remember if he'd ever liked him. Trevor stared at the table in front of him instead of the folder in front of me. Dad still hadn't moved. He had both hands flat on the table, the way he used to stand at the end of a shift and watch the last truck pull out, checking a day's work without saying a word about it. Say something, he said to Trevor. Quiet. Not a boardroom voice, a father's voice, tired all the way down. Trevor looked up. His jaw worked once before anything came out. I was going to pay it back, he said, before anyone looked close enough to care. You pledged something that wasn't yours, I said. There was never going to be a version where you paid it back quietly. Only a version where nobody noticed yet. He didn't argue. That was the part that told me how far gone the whole thing already was. 3 weeks earlier, he'd have had a comeback ready before I finished the sentence. Now he just sat there, hands in his lap, looking like a man doing math he should have done in February. Melissa spoke first, not to him, to the room. I wanted on record I found out an hour before all of you did, she said. March. I saw the home equity paperwork on the kitchen counter and thought it was for a kitchen renovation. It wasn't. Nobody answered that. There wasn't an answer that would have helped her. Warren turned back to the agenda like a man who'd learned a long time ago not to let grief slow down a meeting that still had business in it. The item on the floor is permanent leadership, he said. Danielle has declined the title. The board still needs a name or an interim structure by the end of session. Callahan cleared his throat. What's the alternative? If not Danielle, and obviously not, he didn't finish Trevor's name, just tipped his head at him instead. You could vote in an operations committee, Warren said. 3 members reporting to the board, no single CEO title until a proper search is run. It's not unusual after a transition like this. Who'd sit on it? Callahan asked. I would, I said. Not as CEO. As chief engineer, same as I've always been. Frank Delgado from the floor. And whoever the board wants from finance. You're already Meridian, Callahan said, not unkindly, just laying the fact on the table. Why would you sit on a committee for a company that licenses from you? Because 140 people work here, I said. And none of them signed up to find out their jobs depended on which Coulson kept his temper. I'm not walking away from the plant. I built too much of it to let it wobble because my brother needed a bank loan he couldn't cover. That landed the way true things land in a room that spent 3 weeks arguing about everything except the truth. Nobody argued back. Dad finally spoke again, to the table, not to any one person. "Move it to a vote," he said. It passed 6-1. Callahan's colleague, the other holdout from 3 weeks earlier, was the only no, and even he didn't look like he believed in it anymore. He just didn't like how fast the ground had moved under him. Warren closed his folder. "I'll draft the Operations Committee resolution and file it with the state by Monday," he said. Same day, I filed the amended board minutes. Dad stood up before anyone else did. He looked older standing than he had sitting, jacket a little loose on him now in a way I hadn't noticed until that morning. "I'd like a minute with my daughter," he said. "If the board doesn't mind." Nobody minded. Chairs scraped, people filed out slow, the way people do when they want to look like they're not listening at the door. Trevor didn't look at me on his way past. Melissa did, just for a second, and there was something in it that wasn't anger anymore, just tired. Dad waited until the room cleared, then sat back down across from me, in Trevor's chair instead of his own. $60,000, he said. "You know about that part. Renata told me Tuesday. I didn't tell you because I knew what you'd say. What would I have said? That I was doing it again," he said. "Covering for him instead of making him stand on his own." He rubbed his thumb along the edge of the table, an old habit, like he was checking a seam for a flaw. "Your mother used to say I loved that boy the way some men love a losing horse. Kept betting because I liked how he looked in the gate. She was right. She usually was." He looked at me for a long moment. "You've been running Meridian 3 years and I never noticed. What does that tell you about me?" "That you were looking at Trevor the whole time," I said. "Everybody was. I built something in the part of the room nobody was watching." He nodded slow, like that cost him something to hear and he was going to pay it anyway. "Your mother left you something," he said. "Didn't she? That's what this is. I always wondered why you never asked me for anything after she passed." "She left me a letter," I said, "and $40,000. Told me to put my name on what my hands actually built." He closed his eyes a second. Not tears. Just a man absorbing a hit he'd seen coming from 2 miles off and still didn't manage to duck. "She saw him clearer than I did," he said. "She always did. She saw both of us clear," I said. "She just only had to warn one of us." He almost smiled at that. "Not quite. Close enough." "What happens to him now?" he said. "Not the company. Him." "That's not mine to decide either," I said. "Grant's statement is with the bank. The forged signatures with compliance. Whatever comes of it comes from people who don't share his last name and won't be swayed by it." "That's colder than I expected from you." "It's not cold," I said. "It's just not mine to carry anymore. I carried this company for 3 years without anybody knowing my name was on it. I'm not carrying my brother's mistakes on top of that." He sat with that, hands folded now instead of flat on the table, like a man finally letting the weight settle instead of holding it up out of habit. "Your mother would have liked hearing you say that," he said, out loud, in this room. "She'd have liked knowing it took you this long," I said, "and there wasn't any heat in it. Just the plain fact of it, sitting between us the way plain facts do once nobody's left in the room to argue with them." He didn't answer that. He just reached across the table, the way he used to when I was small and had done something at the plant that surprised him, and set his hand over mine for a second before he stood up and walked out, slower than he used to, into a hallway full of people pretending they hadn't heard every word. Warren's office called on Monday, 10 days after the board vote. Not Warren. His paralegal, a woman named Doris who'd been filing Colson paperwork since before I could drive. "Recorder's office in Summit County wants an in-person confirmation," she said. "Standard when an assignment gets challenged, even informally. Won't take 20 minutes. I drove downtown that afternoon, past the old BF. Goodrich smokestacks nobody's torn down yet, into a building that still smelled like a courthouse from 1975. The clerk pulled the file without looking up. Meridian Seal Works, she said. Assignment recorded 3 years back. Instruments clean. Nothing's changed. That's it, I said. That's it. She stamped a copy and slid it across. Somebody was hoping it wasn't clean. It's clean. I folded it into my bag next to the letter I still carried, the one with my mother's handwriting on it, worn soft at the creases from being read too many times. I didn't need the confirmation. I filed it anyway. Some things you keep on paper even after you already know them in your bones. Back at the plant, Frank Delgado was waiting by the loading dock with a clipboard and a look on his face I'd learned to read 3 years ago. Cure ratios drifting on line 2 again, he said. Same batch of resin as before. Pull a sample, I said. I'll run it in 20 minutes. He didn't ask if I was sure. He just went and pulled it. That was the thing about Frank. He'd stopped waiting for somebody with a title to tell him I was allowed to be right. He'd decided that on his own, a long time before the board had. I adjusted the ratio by a hair, watched the numbers settle, and Frank nodded like a man closing a door that had been rattling in the wind. Good, he said. Good work isn't loud. It just holds. That evening, Renata called from First National, her voice flatter than it had been the last time, like a woman closing out a file she was glad to be done with. Wanted you to hear this from me before it hit anywhere else, she said. Trevor's case went to internal counsel Friday. They're not pursuing criminal referral. Why not? Restitution structure instead, she said. Cleaner for the bank. He's on the hook for the full note. $340,000, the original dealership debt, plus the $60 from your father's line, plus interest and fees. Call it $400 and change. $400,000. I sat with the number a second, the way you sit with any number too big to argue with. And Grant Ashby, I asked. Named in full, cooperating, she said. He's not facing anything worse than Trevor is. Might be facing less. He didn't forge a signature. He just borrowed money he couldn't pay back, same as half this country did in some year or another. Where's the money coming from? I asked. $400,000 doesn't just appear. Property lien on the house, Renata said. Your brother and Melissa's house. They've got 60 days to work out a private sale before the bank forces one. I thought about that house. 4 bedrooms out in Bath Township. A pool Trevor had put in 2 summers back that I remembered him bragging about at a cookout, like the pool was proof of something. Proof he'd never needed, except to himself. Does Melissa know? I asked. She served him with a separation filing this morning, Renata said. I only know because her attorney called ours for the disclosure packet. Wasn't my business to tell you, but you'll hear it by Thursday from somebody, so it might as well be from someone who has the numbers right. I thanked her and hung up and sat in my car in the plant lot a long minute, engine off, looking at the old brick building my grandfather built in 1974. My name nowhere on the sign outside, my name on everything that actually made it run. Trevor called that night. I almost didn't pick up. I'm not asking you to fix it, he said before I could say hello. His voice was thinner than I remembered it. I know you can't. I know you wouldn't if you could. Then why are you calling? I don't know, he said. I guess I wanted to hear you say something. Anything. I thought about all the things I could say. That he'd had every advantage I never got and burned through them anyway. That he'd forged my name like it cost him nothing, like it was just another signature line to get past. That Melissa deserved better than finding out about a loan on her kitchen counter. I didn't say any of it, saying it wouldn't change the number he owed or the house he was about to lose. I hope you land somewhere that isn't running anything, I said. You're not built for it. You never were. That's not an insult, it's just true. He didn't answer for a second. Dad thought I was. Dad wanted you to be, I said. Those aren't the same thing. He hung up first. I let him. Priya came by Meridian's shop that Saturday, the small building on the other side of the towpath corridor, where I kept the real paperwork, the patents, the licensing files, Everything Coulson Seal and Gasket had been quietly leasing back from me for 3 years without most of them knowing my last name was attached to the landlord. "You look lighter," she said, leaning in the doorway. "I feel like I put something down," I said. "Not him, just the waiting. 3 years of waiting for somebody to ask why the invoices said Meridian. Nobody ever asked?" "One did," I said. "Ed Rourke's purchasing manager, maybe a year in. I told him it was a licensing restructure for tax purposes. He believed me because it was boring enough to be true." Priya laughed, short and real. "Boring is the best lie there is." I looked around the shop. Small office, 1 drafting table, a filing cabinet with 6 patent folders in it, and a shoebox of client contracts that had quietly become the only contracts that mattered. On the wall by the window, a photo I'd hung the week I filed the Meridian paperwork. My mother at the original plant, 26 years old, ledger book open on her lap, laughing at something off camera. "She'd have liked this place," Priya said. "She'd have liked that it took this long to need saying out loud," I said. "She always did things quiet. I think that's where I got it." Outside, the towpath ran along the river the way it had for 150 years. Mule paths turned bike trail, mills turned into event halls and lofts, and, in a few stubborn cases, into companies that still made something with their hands. I thought about the sign back at the main plant, still reading Coulson Seal and Gasket, still true enough for now. I thought about the smaller sign I hadn't hung yet, folded in a drawer in this office, waiting for the day I decided the quiet part was finally over. Melissa called the following Tuesday. Not through Renata, not through a lawyer. Her own number, one I still had saved from a wedding 4 years back. "I need a favor," she said. "And I know I don't get to ask you for favors anymore. Ask anyway. I need a job." Her voice was steady, the kind of steady that costs something to hold. "Not from Trevor. Not near Trevor. I've got a marketing degree nobody's used since 2014 and a house that's closing escrow in 19 days. I sat with that a second. "What's the house going for?" $410, she said. "Bank gets $390 of it. I walk with maybe $11,000 after fees. 20 years married, and that's what's left with my name on it. $11,000. I thought about my mother's 40 sitting in a lockbox for 3 years before I ever touched it. Different women, different decades, same math. Whatever a man builds, somebody else usually ends up counting what's left when he's done building it." "Meridian doesn't have a marketing department," I said. "But I've got 6 patents nobody outside this state has ever heard of, and clients who think Coulson invented the resin they're buying. That's a story that needs telling, right?" "You're offering me a job. I'm offering you an interview," I said. "Don't come in soft because you think I owe you something. Come in like you want it." She laughed, short, wet at the edges. "I forgot you talk like that." "Like what?" "Like there's no world where you'd hire somebody out of pity." "There isn't," I said. "Pity doesn't build anything either." She started 2 weeks later, a folding table in the corner of the Meridian shop until Priya could clear the old parts closet into an actual office. First week, she rewrote every client letter I'd been sending out under a logo I'd designed myself in an hour, back when a logo was the last thing on my mind. She showed me a draft on her second day, and it read better than anything I'd put my own name to in 3 years. "You're good at this," I told her. "I used to be good at a lot of things before I spent 20 years being good at one," she said. "Being married to your brother." I didn't answer that. There wasn't a version of an answer that wouldn't have sounded like I was scoring a point I didn't want. Dad called less often than he used to, which told me more than any conversation could. When he did call, it was short, practical, a man checking in on a business he no longer ran instead of a father checking in on a daughter he'd finally started to see. He'd moved out of the house on Merriman a month after the board vote, into a condo near Highland Square, smaller, no lawn to keep up, No room set aside for a son who used to visit on Sundays. I sold the boat, he told me on one of those calls. Didn't need it. Never used it more than 4 times a summer anyway. How much did you get? 22 after the broker's cut. A pause. Your mother always said that boat was the loudest thing I ever bought, quietly wanting to matter to somebody. She was right about a lot of things. She usually was, he said again, the same line from the boardroom, worn smoother each time he used it, like a stone he kept turning over in his pocket. He never asked about Trevor on those calls, and I never brought him up first. Some silences aren't avoidance. Some are just two people agreeing there's nothing left to say that hasn't already cost enough. I heard about Trevor secondhand, the way you hear about weather in a county you used to live in. He'd taken a job managing parts inventory for a tire distributor off Kelly Avenue, 40 minutes from the seat he used to sit in at Colson. Frank Delgado's cousin worked the same warehouse and mentioned it to Frank, who mentioned it to me without either of us making it a thing. He's not bad at it, Frank said, counting boxes. Keeping a ledger straight. Guess some men need the ceiling lowered before they find the room they actually fit in. I thought about that a long time after Frank said it, not with satisfaction, just with a kind of tired clarity, the same clarity Frank brought to a cure ratio drifting half a degree off spec. Some things don't need punishing. They just need to land where they land and stop being anybody else's weight to carry. The bank's fraud review closed out in September. Renata called with the final numbers, businesslike, done with the file for good this time. Grant Ashby settled for restitution on his half, she said. $80,000, paid over 4 years, no criminal charge. Banks satisfied. Compliance flagged the forged sign-off in Trevor's permanent file. Doesn't follow him to jail. Follows him everywhere else he ever tries to borrow money again. That's the whole thing, then. That's the whole thing, she said. $406,000 total, between the dealership note and your father's home equity line, paid off through the house sale, the settlement, and a wage garnishment on the new job that'll run about 6 years at his salary. 6 years. I did the math without meaning to. Trevor would be 43 before that debt stopped following him to work every morning. Thank you for calling, I said. You didn't have to keep me posted this whole time. You're the one who kept your patents clean for 3 years before anybody needed you to, Renata said. Least I could do was keep you in the loop on the mess that came after. I hung up and sat at the drafting table in the Meridian shop a long minute, the late afternoon light coming in low through the one window that actually caught sun this time of year. Melissa was 2 rooms over, boxes half unpacked around her new desk, humming something I didn't recognize. Priya was out on the floor walking a new hire through the press line. Frank's truck was still in the lot, which meant line 2 was probably running late again, which meant nothing was actually wrong, just Frank being Frank about a batch he didn't fully trust yet. I opened the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet, past the shoebox of contracts, past the 6 patent folders, to the flat wooden crate I'd kept sealed since the week I filed Meridian's paperwork. Inside it, wrapped in the same brown paper it had come in from the sign shop, was the piece I'd never hung. Meridian Seal Works, brushed steel, 18 inches by 6, my own hand having picked the font off a sample book at a shop on Copley Road 3 years back, the week after I read my mother's letter for the first time. I'd paid for it in cash, $430, and then I'd wrapped it up and put it in a drawer and let it sit there for 3 years, next to a business that quietly owned everything and admitted to nothing. I ran my thumb along the edge of it, the way Dad ran his thumb along a table seam, an old family habit none of us had ever named out loud. Priya stuck her head in the doorway. New hires asking why the invoices don't match the sign out front, she said, half a laugh in it. Told him it's a licensing thing, boring enough to be true. Good line, I said. I learned it from you. She looked at the crate in my hands and then at my face and didn't ask the question out loud. She didn't have to. You gonna hang that? She said instead. I looked at the empty stretch of brick above the shop door, the spot I'd measured out myself the same week I bought the sign, back when I told myself I wasn't ready yet, back when quiet still felt safer than true. "Get me the drill," I said. The drill was in the truck bed, still in its case from a hardware run Frank had made weeks back for something else entirely. Priya brought it in, along with a level and a box of anchors, and set them on the drafting table like she'd been waiting for me to ask. "You want help?" she said. "Or you want to do this alone?" "Help," I said. "I've done enough alone." Melissa came in from the back office when she heard the drill whine, wiping her hands on her jeans, a printer proof still in one fist. She looked at the crate, then at the wall, then at me. "That what I think it is," she said. "Depends what you think it is." "The real sign," she said. "The one that should have been up front the whole time." "It's not going out front," I said. "Not yet. This one goes here first, where the 6 of us already know what it means." Frank wandered in from the lot, drawn by the noise the way he was always drawn to any sound that meant something was being fixed. He took one look at the steel letters leaning against the wall and just nodded, slow, like a man confirming a number he'd already guessed. "About time," he said. "You knew," I said. "I've known for 2 years," Frank said. "Man doesn't run cure ratios on Coulson's Line 2 for a company that doesn't own the resin formula. I do the math for a living. I just never said anything because you never asked me to." I held the sign level while Priya marked the studs. Melissa steadied the bottom edge. The drill bit through brick dust in short bursts, and each hole felt less like construction and more like something being made permanent that had been true for a long time already. "Your mom would have made you do this 3 years ago," Priya said over the noise. "My mom told me to put my name on what my hands actually built," I said. "She didn't say when. I got to pick when. And you picked now. I picked now. We got the first bracket up, then the second. The letters sat heavier than I expected, real weight in the steel, not just the idea of it. When the last screw went in and Priya stepped back to check the level, the whole shop went quiet for a second, the kind of quiet that isn't empty, just full of something that doesn't need talking over. Meridian Seal Works, brushed steel, catching the low afternoon light through the one window that still got sun this time of year, same as it had every day for 3 years, except now there was something on the wall to catch it with. "Feels smaller than I thought it would," Melissa said. "The moment, I mean. Not the sign." "That's usually how it goes," I said. "The big ones don't announce themselves. They just sit there being true until you finally let them." We were still standing there, coffee going cold on the drafting table, when I heard tires on the gravel out front. Slow, careful. A man who didn't drive this lot often enough to trust it. I looked out the window and saw Dad's sedan easing in next to Frank's truck. The same car he'd driven to the retirement dinner off Merriman Road, still a little too clean for a plant lot. "You expecting him?" Priya asked. "No," I said, "but I'm not surprised either." He got out slow, one hand on the doorframe the way he did now, joints stiffer than they used to be, and stood there a second looking at the building like he was recalculating something. Then he saw the sign. I watched it land on him the way I'd watched 100 numbers land on him over 30 years, adjusting his face by degrees until it settled somewhere he could hold. He came in without knocking. Nobody in that shop had ever knocked, not since the day I stopped needing anybody's permission to be there. "Meridian," he said, reading it off the wall like he was testing whether the word would hurt on the way out. "That's been the name the whole time." 3 years, I said. "Your mother's maiden name," he said. "Meridian. I always wondered where you got it. I thought it was just a word you liked the sound of." "It's not a word I liked," I said. "It's the last name she had before she married a man who put his own name on the building and never once put hers next to it." He didn't argue that. He looked at the sign a while longer, hands in his coat pockets, A man standing in a building he used to think he understood. "I called you the face," he said finally. Quiet, not defending it, just saying it out loud, maybe for the first time since the night he'd said it in front of 40 people. At the party. "I said you were the face and he was the boss." "I remember," I said. "I was wrong about which one of you was running anything," he said. "I think some part of me knew it even then. I just didn't want to be the one who had to say it." "You didn't have to say it," I said. "I already knew. I just needed you to find out on your own." He nodded, slow, and looked around the little shop, the drafting table, the 6 patent folders in the cabinet, Melissa's desk with its half-unpacked boxes, Frank leaning in the doorway with grease still under his nails from a batch he'd probably gone back to check on twice already that day. "Your mother would have built this exact room," he said. "Small, quiet. Everything that matters kept close enough to touch." "She did build it," I said. "She just didn't get to see it finished." He didn't say anything to that. He just stood there a while, in front of a sign that told the truth about who owned what, in a building his daughter had quietly turned into the only company that mattered, and for once in his life, he let the silence be enough. He stayed a few minutes longer, then said he had a doctor's appointment he couldn't push back again, and left the way he'd come, slow, one hand on the doorframe. Nobody followed him out. Nobody needed to. Priya swept up the drill dust while Melissa went back to her proofs. Frank drifted out to the lot to check line 2 one more time, because that's who Frank was, a man who trusted a batch only after he'd checked it 3 times past reasonable. I stood alone under the sign a minute, coffee gone cold in my hand. Then I went and got Warren Tate on the phone. "I want to change something," I told him. "Not the LLC, the contracts. Which contracts? Everyone going forward. Employee agreements, vendor agreements, anything with a name attached to work. Change how? I want a clause," I said. "Anybody who invents something here, their name goes on it. Not just the company's. Theirs too. Permanently. Even if they leave." Warren was quiet a second. I could hear him writing already. "That's not standard," he said. "Most shops keep it simple. Company owns the work. Full stop." "I know," I said. "I lived the version where a woman did the books for 30 years, and her name never touched a single filing. I'm not building that twice. You're talking about Priya. I'm talking about anybody who ever stands where I used to stand," I said. "Priya's just the first one it applies to." He drew it up inside a week. 3 pages, plain language, nothing fancy. Any employee who contributed to a patentable process got named as co-inventor on the filing. Royalty split spelled out in writing, 5% minimum, more if the contribution was larger. Not a bonus, not a gift. A number in a contract, enforceable the way my mother's name should have been enforceable 30 years ago and never was. Priya read it at her workbench, one hand still holding a wrench, gasket she'd been fitting resting half forgotten in the vise. "You didn't have to do this," she said. "I know. Nobody would have known the difference if you hadn't." "I would have known," I said. "That's the whole problem with the old way. Nobody ever knows until the person's already gone." She signed it standing up, right there at the bench, wrench still in her other hand, and handed the pen back like the moment didn't need to be bigger than it was. Frank signed his the next morning, muttering something about lawyers and their extra pages. But he signed it, and when I told him the resin blend he'd helped tune Online 2 last spring now had his name filed next to mine on the paperwork, he just nodded once and went back to his gauges like I'd told him the weather. "Didn't do it for credit," he said. "I know," I said. "That's exactly why you're getting it." Melissa didn't need the same clause. Marketing wasn't patent work. But she got her own line anyway, her name on every campaign she wrote, credited the way nobody had ever credited 2 decades of running somebody else's household and calling it a marriage. "You put my name on the county filing," she said, reading over a printed proof I'd left on her desk. The brand one, for the Meridian materials. You wrote it, I said. It's yours. Trevor never once put my name on anything, she said. Not the house, not the cars, not one account in 18 years. I noticed. I know you did, she said. That's why I'm still here. 2 weeks after the sign went up, the county recorder's office sent a routine notice, the kind that shows up in a mailbox and means nothing to most people. Meridian Seal Works, LLC, listed as sole assignee on 6 active patents, filing complete, public record updated. I read it standing at the counter in the little kitchenette off the shop floor, and it didn't feel like a headline. It felt like paperwork finally agreeing with something that had been true the whole time. I drove out to Glendale that same afternoon, cemetery quiet under a flat gray sky, the kind Akron gets more of than it deserves. My mother's stone sat where it always sat, small, plain, Louise Coulson and 2 dates and nothing else, because that's what Dad had picked out, and nobody had asked her opinion on her own marker any more than they'd asked it on the business. I brought a second stone, small, flat, meant to sit flush in the grass beside hers, not replace anything, just add to it. I'd had it cut the week the county notice came in. Meridian Steelworks, founded on her name. I knelt and set it in place myself, no ceremony, no one there but me and a groundskeeper 2 rows over who didn't look up. You told me to put my name on what my hands built, I said, quiet, to nobody who could hear it back. I did. Took me 3 years to say it out loud where anybody else could see it. The wind moved through the maples along the fence line, and that was the only answer I got, and it was enough. Back at the shop that evening, Priya was training the new hire, a kid named Devin, 22, first real job out of a machinist program at the community college 2 exits down 76. I watched her walk him through the press line, patient in a way I recognized because it was the same patience Frank had shown me years back, before I had 6 patents to my name, before any of this had a shape. This company's not old, Priya told him, but it's not new either. Owner built it from nothing. Started with 1 contract and a mother's $40,000, and now it runs half the parts on that whole customer list downtown. Devin glanced toward the office. That's her? The one who owns it? That's her, Priya said. And unlike some places, if you help build something here, your name goes on it too, not just hers. Devin looked at the sign through the window, Meridian Seal Works, catching the last of the light, and didn't say anything, just nodded the way a young man nods when he's filing something away to understand later. I stood in the doorway of my own office and watched that, and thought about the version of this shop that could have existed if I'd let Trevor's name sit on top of everything the way Dad wanted. Thought about Devin walking in one day to work for a company he'd never fully understand, never see his own name attached to anything he built with his hands. That wasn't going to be this place, not on my watch. I went back to my desk and pulled the shoebox out of the bottom drawer one more time, past the patent folders, down to the very bottom, where a small brass key still sat on a ring I hadn't taken off my keys in 4 years. Credit Union lockbox key. I didn't need it anymore, not for anything practical. The lockbox was empty now, my mother's letter long since read and refolded and kept in a frame on the office wall instead, next to a photo of her at the original plant in 1974, hard hat crooked, grin like she already knew something the rest of the room didn't. I could have taken the key off. There was no reason left to carry it. I kept it on anyway. Some things you carry past the point of needing them, just so you remember what they cost to earn. Outside, Frank's truck pulled out of the lot, headlights sweeping once across the brick wall where the new sign hung, steel catching the beam for half a second before the dark took it back. Melissa's office light clicked off a few minutes later. Priya walked Devin out to his car, still talking gasket tolerances, voice carrying faint across the gravel. I stayed a while longer, the way I always did, the last one out most nights. Not because anyone made me, but but because I liked being the one who locked the door. I stood under the sign one more time before I left, coffee cup empty in my hand, and looked at the letters I'd waited 3 years to put up. I never needed the title. I already had my name on it. I turned off the lights and locked the door behind me,